Hello everybody and welcome back to Bad Luck Garage and to another DR Nova video. So today we are finally starting on the fuel system for the LS Swap Nova. What I have here is a Tanks Inc. fuel tank, our fuel gauge sending unit. This is just the new gas cap, and then we have our fuel pump as well as our sending unit for that. Now, in order to keep the video length down a little bit, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the fuel system a two-part thing. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to put together the Tanks Inc. Fuel tank. You kind of have to adjust the sending unit for both the fuel gauge and the fuel pump. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that, get the fuel tank ready to go in. Then in the next video, we'll do like I'll actually have the fuel tank in and we'll run all the fuel lines. But before I get started on this, real quick, I actually got some subscriber mail the other day. I went ahead and opened it, and I'm going to roll that footage in real quick. All right, so what we got here is a package from Dustin Cheshire. I have no clue what this is, what's in this box. He wouldn't tell me. He told me he was sending me something all the way from Texas here, but he would not tell me what was in it. So kind of gonna be a surprise here, but we're gonna open it up real quick and see what's in it before we get started on the rest of the video. All right, looks like we've got a letter here. Excuses are like assholes. Everyone has one. Get out in the garage and fabricate something. From your all-wheel drive buddy from Odessa, Texas, Dustin Cheshire. P.S. Sorry, couldn't get you a blow-up doll. Okay. Oh shit. Seriously, man? Oh, now the letter makes sense. Remember a couple videos ago I was telling you that I was gonna have to go I wanted to make an extension cord for the new welder that we bought. I was just gonna have to go buy the wire. Well, it looks like, I don't know how many feet of it are here, but it looks like Dustin has sent us an extension cord. Holy crap, man. Now this is the wrong plug, but I can just change the plug here on this end and then put like a thing on the other end. Yeah, there's a lot of, holy shit, there's a lot of wire here. Dude, this is like massive. Like I was gonna run 10-2. This is like freaking, what is this, like 8 gauge or something? 4 gauge? Good God. Look at the size of this, guys. Holy shit. This has got to be some expensive shit. Dustin, I appreciate it, brother. That is freaking awesome. Hell yeah. I guess we're gonna have to start learning how to weld now. You guys just keep hooking me. There's more. Oh, and he sent me some weather pack connectors too. Yeah, he sent me a bunch of weather pack connectors, guys. And these aren't like the cheap eBay ones that I showed you in a previous video. These are actually like the, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, like Deutschwerks or whatever. Yeah, these are nice. Holy shit, man. I guess I'm gonna have to learn to use my super expensive crimper that I stole from the US Army, huh? I'm actually really broke, guys. Like, no freaking kidding, I'm broke. So what I'm gonna do is, hopefully my next payday, I will get all this wired up the way I just told you. And yeah, so we'll have a cord now that we can drag. Like, I'm sure this will reach all the way to the other side of the garage. So we'll be able to pretty much use our welder anywhere we want. Man, this is some thick freaking wire though. It's gonna be a pain in the ass to roll that up, huh? That's badass, brother. I appreciate it. I appreciate all you guys when you send me stuff. You don't have to send me stuff, guys, but when you do, that's awesome. Now back to the topic of this video. We're gonna get this fuel tank put together. What we have here, this is actually the fuel level sending unit. And you know what? I was going to show you all the part numbers, but I think what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and put the links to all these parts in the description. This is not a kit, guys. You have to order everything separate. You can order these with you know, a variety of different fuel pumps. I opted for the Walbro 255. You can see genuine Walbro there. This should be more than enough to feed our engine here. Even if he decides later on he wants to, you know, put like 100 shot on it or something like that, this should still keep up. For the fuel pump pickup, you are going to need some -6 to 1/4 inch NPT adapters. Those are going to screw in for our feed and return line to adapt this to -6. Now, if you're not using -6 connectors, you know, get whatever adapters you need, but the inlet and outlet on this guy right here, these are 1/4 inch NPT threads. So keep that in mind when you're deciding on what fuel line to go with. I hope you guys can see this, but this tank actually has like a really freaking nice finish on it. I mean, it almost looks like it's like a ceramic coat chrome or something. Really nice finish. The tank also comes with a new filler neck here, which seems to have the same coating on it that the tank does. And here are the gaskets. Huh. Looks like some kind of baffle, maybe for the vent. I don't know, I'm gonna have to read the instructions. But it comes with that little baffle there with a check valve in it. Maybe it's like a rollover valve or something. Comes with this little 3-way vent connector. Yeah, gaskets for the tank. We need to take a measurement from the bottom of the tank up to the edge of this surface here. And what we need to do is put our sock on our pump here, and however deep that is, we need to measure from the bottom of this down to the bottom of our pump sock and cut our hose off to fit in the pump there. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. You guys remember back to Project Stepping Wolf, you know, where we were having all the fuel slosh issues? The tank baffle in that stock Blazer tank was only like that tall. The baffle in this tank is like twice, if not 3 times as deep. So we shouldn't have any issues with the fuel slosh thing with this tank. So measuring our depth here, it looks like 9 or 8 and 5/8. 8 and 5/8 is actually right there. I've got my little scribe right here. I'm going to take my fuel pump and the thickness of my sock here and place it. See, how thick is that sock? Right there. So we're going to put it right there where it's going to be right at the bottom of the tank. And then what we're going to need to do here is cut our fuel line right about here where I can put the fuel pump nipple here all the way up in it, and the length will still be correct. Here we go, Bad Luck Garage. We have issues already in that the pump is still loose and the clamp it's stripped out, guys. Like like it will not go any tighter, and you can see I can still move the pump up and down on this hose. So that's not good. So here's the thing. This is a very stiff hose. Like I almost feel like it's heat shrink or something. I don't know. One thing that makes me think that is it looks like it was heat shrunk on up here at the hat. I mean, I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of melted. So let me check the instructions, see if I'm supposed to heat that up. I think I screwed up. So here's the deal. When I pulled this cap, right, or this when I pulled this fuel pump out initially, it had what looked like a piece of this line, which you can see is shoved in up here, a piece of this return line, and it was stuck on the end of it. So I thought it was just a cap of some sort. So, you know, I cut it off, but I'm thinking, even though it doesn't say anything about it in the instructions, I'm thinking maybe, oh, here it is. You can see that right here. I think maybe what's going on here is I was supposed to leave that on here to maybe to take up some space inside here. So at this point, what I'm going to do, I have to trim this return line anyway, and you can see it's going to have to be trimmed like way up here because it needs to be a little higher than the pump. So I think what I'm going to do is, before I do the full trim, I'm going to cut a piece of it off the same length as the piece I pulled off of the pump when I first pulled it out of the package, and slide it over there, and hopefully that'll work. So the instructions say to insert it and then turn, you know, spin the pump until it's just snuggled up against the return line there. So that's what I did. And yeah, I think we're good now, guys, because that is very tight now. Yeah, hopefully it won't leak or anything. So we're going to move on to the next step. First, we're going to insert our sleeve on the pump. And this is mainly to quiet it down, help with vibration, things like that. And then the picture says to run the return line down and cut it off at an angle away from the pump, kind of right at the bottom of the pump sleeve there. So I'm gonna do that. There we go. There's our finished assembly. We'll just go ahead and plug in our fuel pump wires. I think what I'm gonna do is kind of wrap them around like that. And then, yeah, plug her on in. Last thing it says to do is to take the included zip ties and tie our fuel pump to our return line. But before I do that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my sock on, and I'm going to take it over here and make sure it fits down in the tank properly, because if I have to take it apart and trim it, I don't want to have to cut those zip ties. So let me check that out, and I'll get right back with you. I do want to say one thing to be mindful of, guys, is figure out which direction you want to point your fuel lines, because the baffle in the tank, it's gonna, you know, like I have them, let me show you. I'm gonna have my fuel lines coming out this direction, which makes more sense because this is gonna aim towards the passenger side, and I'm running my fuel lines up the passenger side. So the baffle down here in the tank, it comes right through here and down through here, all the way down to about right here, then goes way over here and way over here. So, you know, if I would have aimed my sock this way or this way, it would have been hitting on the baffle in the tank. So, you know, the sock needs to be going that direction. However you orient your lines, just make sure you orient the sock to where it goes that direction, or it'll probably work also in this direction, but it is not going to work in that direction or in that direction. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, we're good with our fuel pump. I was able to shine a flashlight down in our fuel sending unit, our fuel gauge sending unit hole, and before I even put the sock on, I could see that it was just barely above the edge of the tank. So with our sock on, it ought to be riding right on the feet on the bottom of the sock. So that should be great. So now that I know I'm good with all that, we will go ahead and put our little zip ties on here. Before I mount this in the tank, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch to -6 fittings, and we're going to screw them into the inlet and outlet ports here. I'm actually going to put a little bit of gasket maker on it. Now the better thing to use would probably be like a Teflon based sealant, but I don't currently have any. This stuff is fuel resistant, so it ought to be just fine. Now that we're finished screwing our fittings in, we'll take our cork gasket, slide him on here, slide our assembly down in the tank here, and install the hardware. Now that the fuel pump assembly is installed, we're going to move on to our sending unit for our fuel level indicator. Here's what we got. We got our little floaty arm thingy. We've got our rheostat and our mount here. And then we've got our gasket and screws. You have got to get this adjusted as close to perfect as you can, because if you don't, then what's going to end up happening is your fuel gauge isn't going to read right. So step one, it just tells you right off the bat, if your fuel tank is between 6 inches and 5.5 inches deep, which ours is 8 5/8 inches deep, if it's not any deeper than 5.5 inches, then we're going to have to just discard this whole lower bracket here. So in order to do that, what I need to do is take the screws out that are mounting this bracket to the main bracket, and then I need to take the screws out of the rheostat and reattach it to the main bracket. So we've got our lower bracket off, we slid our rheostat onto the main bracket. Now, here's the important part. We need this point right here, which is the swivel for our float. This swivel point needs to be exactly at the halfway point of the tank. Now, it also says to add 1/8 inch to 1/8 inch to the thickness because of the, or 1/8 inch to the depth because of the thickness of the of the gasket there, guys. So that would be 6/8, which would actually be 1 3/4. So our tank is technically, or I'm sorry, 8 3/4. Tank technically 8 3/4 inches deep with the thickness of the gasket. I hope that makes sense. So we need to cut that in half, which I am absolutely horrible at fractions. So let's look at the tape measure. So 3/4 of an inch. So that would be about what? 3/8? Yeah. So we're going to go 4 3/8, I believe, would be half of that. Yeah. 4 3/8 is where we need our swivel point to be from the top of this. So I'm going to measure 4 3/8. I hope that's right. 4 3/8. Yeah, so there it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that just in case I slip while I'm putting the screws in. So I know it needs to line up with that line and that line. All right. Okay, now the instructions actually say to cut off you know, any excess amount of this. So we cut the excess length off. Our swivel point is exactly 4 3/8 of an inch, which is the halfway point of our tank. Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to mount our indicator arm here, which from the looks of it is only going to be like that freaking long or something. Crazy. So what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to loosen the set screw. I'm going to be careful to hold my thumb against this so that this does not rotate. We're going to pull our little pin out there and slide our arm down in. What we're going to do now, the instructions say to, you know, you're going to hold that up until it's touching down here, and then we're going to slide the bar through the hole here until the float is level with the top of the tank. Slide this down. That's just why I said this arm's going to be really short, guys. And we're going to try to eyeball it. It's probably not going to show good on the camera, but here, if I turn it this way, well, no, if I turn it that way, it's going to have to be even shorter. So we're going to put it about like that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take my old bracket. So I can take my old bracket here. And just kind of hold it out like that and bring this up till it touches it. Cut this off just even with the stop here, because if you don't, there's going to be so much weight on this side that as the tank goes down, this isn't going to fall. So, you know, you've got to have more weight on this side for this to work properly. So I am just going to take my cutters here, my Kleins, and I'm just going to cut it off even with that little metal bar there. At this point, we should be able to just slide our gasket on there and put it in the tank. And when you're doing this, guys, like when you're putting this in, it's just like when you put your fuel pump in. Be mindful that this ball's going to have to move up and down. So you want to try to get it somewhere where there's not going to be any interference with it moving up and down, if that makes sense. And this is where I just really hope I got this right. Because I'd hate for this to be like one of those deals where, you know, like Ray thinks he's out of gas when he's not, or worse yet, doesn't know he's out of gas when he is. There we go. Now we're lined up. Okay, guys, so these holes are actually like not all drilled. It's not a symmetrical pattern, so keep that in mind when you're putting your gasket on. Make sure you've got it to where it all lines up before you start sinking screws in. Now I want to address the wiring. I have two ground wires here, which we are going to tie together. Then we're going to have a power wire for the fuel pump, and we're going to have a resistance wire for our fuel gauge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use ring terminals. I'm going to run our two grounds out, and I'm going to leave them, you know, about yay long, just two runs. And I'll use ring terminals on these two. I'll run a wire out for my power wire. I'm probably going to use a fairly thick, let me see what I got. Okay, I've got a whole roll of 12 gauge wire. So that's probably what we're going to use for our fuel pump. That should be plenty big enough for our Walbro 255. So I'll pull that out, and we'll just run like some 14 gauge or something for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run those into a weather pack connector, and that'll have that part set up. Didn't do anything fancy, just like I said, I crimped on, now these are still loose, but I crimped on ring terminals to the ends of all these. I've got my sending unit for the fuel gauge. You know, I just use like a 14 gauge, or I mean like a 18 gauge. No, I think it's either 16 or 18 gauge wire. It doesn't really have to be that thick. For the grounds, I used 14 gauge wire, and then for my fuel pump, I actually used a 12 gauge wire. And this is actually, I'm actually going to run a relay to this, so we'll cover that later on when I'm doing the wiring harness. But for now, what I'd like to do is I want to run all these wires together and run them into a weather pack style connector. Now, I want to go ahead and tell you guys, I will put a link for these connectors in the description of this video, along with a link for all the other parts. But I bought this whole set, guys. Everything you see here, it come with like everything from a single wire connector up to a 6-wire weather pack style connector. You can see both ends here. It come with that, you know, all the pins and everything you need. all the inserts. I believe I paid maybe $11 for all of this, and then I bought the case at Harbor Freight for $5 on sale. So you know, just one actual weather pack connector would cost you that. So I got all these for that price. So what I want to do is I want to tie the well, I'll probably just use a 4-wire connector here, and I'll put 2 grounds, and then my resistance wire for my fuel gauge, and then my fuel pump wire into that. That way I'll have a way to quickly disconnect if I need to. Now, since I'm doing the wire connector off camera, we can move on. So the next thing we have to deal with is our fuel filler here. Now we have our neck here, and we have the way to tie it together right here. Now, originally I was worried about, am I going to get the orientation of this right? But it's pretty simple, guys. The fuel neck actually has the vent right here in it, you know, to vent as you pour gas. Obviously, that's going to go on top. So all we got to do is put a coupler on, and now we just need to shove the neck in there. The tank came with everything that I've showed you, but it did not come with any kind of clamps for this guy here. So I'm going to have to grab some. I mean, I've got some clamps here, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, I've got some clamps here that I'll end up putting on, but I'm not sure if I'm going to have to bend this or adjust it or anything when I'm putting the tank in. So we'll leave those off for now. That's how that goes. We'll just stick our nice new cap on so we don't lose it. And now we will address this little 3-way that came with the fuel tank. So I had no idea what this guy was for, but after reading the instructions, it seems what they want you to do is in fuel injected applications, there's a lot of pressure that builds up in the tank. So instead of just using one or the other of these vents here, they want you to use both. So that's why they give you this little guy to tie both these vents together. Now, here's where it gets funny, guys. In a sick joke, what they did is the barb fittings on this are actually smaller than the barb fittings on these. So the hose that fits these is a pretty loose fit on this. So what I'm going to have to do is, you know, end up using hose clamps on all this stuff. But that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put some hose on here. And the trick here, guys, is, you know, I've got to leave room for my fuel lines, and I'm not sure how much room I have above this. So what I'm probably going to do is try to tie it like up here, run my fuel lines under it, because they want you to mount this vent assembly right here. It's got like a little check ball in it. I don't know if you can, yeah, I don't guess that comes out, but it's got a little one-way check ball in it. But they want you to mount this guy somewhere up higher than the fuel filler neck level under the vehicle. So I'm not sure until I get the other tank dropped, which I'll be doing tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to mount that vent, but I do know I need to tie these together. So I guess we'll just do this. Bring them all the way out to here. Yeah, give myself a little slack. So I'll bring them all the way out to here. If I have to go back and shorten them for whatever reason, then, you know, that's fine. So that's all tied together. Like I said, we'll get 4 hose clamps. Well, 5, because we'll need one here too. Probably 6, because knowing my luck, we'll probably need one on this too. So yeah, I'll get 6 hose clamps tomorrow, and we'll deal with that. I may also just go ahead and buy me a decent set of crimpers to do my wiring here tomorrow as well. Edit. I could not leave well enough alone, so I managed to get this all finished tonight. So I found 4 hose clamps, the right side I needed for the vent lines. I got all my wires tightened up here, put some tubing around them, some convoluted tubing. And I want to say this, the eBay connectors I got, just in case you guys do think about ordering them, because I am going to put a link in the description. These connectors are only good up to max, and I mean max, 14 gauge wire. I actually had trouble crimping the connectors onto the ground wires that I used, which were 14 gauge. I had no problem getting them onto the 16 gauge wire or the 18 gauge wire, but once it got down to 14, and then the 12 gauge wire that I actually used for the fuel pump wire, yeah, that was a definite no-go. But huge shout out to our mail guy, the guy who actually sent us all that stuff today, because I ended up using the connectors that he sent. And so Dustin Cheshire, I really, really, really appreciate you, brother. You hooked me up, and I actually ended up having to use those because the connectors I had, I could not use reliably with a 14 gauge wire, and definitely not with a 12 gauge. So these would be good for trigger wires, PCM wires, things like that. But once you get over 14 gauge, like I said, you can make them work with 14 gauge, but definitely not 12. So anything over 14 gauge, these are not going to work, guys. Just had to throw this little edit in there, so if it looks out of place, that's why, because I'd actually finished the outro to the video, and then I came back out here and I was like, yeah, I can't leave this alone. So less work I have to do tomorrow. Well, that's pretty much it for this one. We got our tank all together, ready to go in. So tomorrow I'm going to drop the old tank, hopefully stick this new tank up in there, and we're going to start running our fuel lines. So that should be the next video. As I've said several times throughout this video, I will post links for all these parts in the description of this video. So if you're doing a Nova, you can follow the same procedure, use the same parts. Once again, thanks everybody for watching. As always, if you like this video, make sure you click the thumbs up button. Subscribe if you want to follow this build or any of the other builds we've got going on at the moment. And get out in the garage, get something done, and I'll see you next time here on Bad Luck Garage.